It's my favorite speaker of the day, although it's hard to beat Bethany. But this is my wife, Lynn. And she's not up here because she's my wife. She's up here because she's a psychologist who has worked with a number of people with chronic disorders. And she's talked to a number of organizations around the country on different disorders, has dealt with some patients with CMT, and I think she has a nice perspective on this for you. If we all could be like Bethany and have that positive fighting attitude, that would be tremendous. And we need to find out what Bethany's been drinking, because we should all drink it. But in case you're not drinking what Bethany's drinking, Lynn may have some interesting observations for you.
Thank you for a great introduction. It's not the kind of introduction I usually get. And I'm really delighted to be here today talking with all of you. It feels like an honor after listening to your stories and talking to a number of you. This also feels like a very tall place. I'm usually in a much more intimate group. One of the things that I was going to say to begin today is that while I'm talking with you about some of the emotional effects of living with chronic disease, that in fact you know a lot more about it than I do in many ways, given that you live with it day in and day out. And then after hearing Bethany talk, it occurred to me that I felt like the kid in class that was then, after her paper, supposed to get up and read my paper about how I'm afraid of heights. So yes, if we could, so I'll be using some of the things she said actually as a way of illustrating some of the ideas that I wanted to share with you. Having worked a lot with people that live with chronic disease and having had some physical issues myself in my life, there's a perspective that I think can be really helpful. And that has to do with the idea that we all have thoughts and feelings and reactions that we're aware of, but that we also, all of us, have a whole host of thoughts and feelings that we aren't so aware of. And even though we're not aware of them, they can have a huge impact on our perceptions of things and how we relate to other people. And so if we can become aware of them, I think that it can be really helpful as we struggle through different things in life. And one of the things that I found for myself, as well as for the people that I work with, that oftentimes putting things into words in the presence of someone else, to someone else, can be very, very helpful in clarifying things and in a sense, shifting our perspective if we're stuck in a particular pattern. It's sort of like looking through a kaleidoscope, that the elements in the kaleidoscope are the same, they don't change, but when you shift them around, it's clearly a different picture. And I think that sometimes being able to talk out loud to someone and to think about something in a different way can be very helpful in terms of shifting one's perspective. One of the things that I found in my work is that there are some commonalities, things that most people feel that struggle with chronic disease. And then there are some things that are different and unique to each person, and each disease has its own unique challenges. So I'd like to spend a couple minutes talking about some of the commonalities and then talk a little bit more about some of the ways in which we feel differently than other people and how that can at times be confusing to our friends and to our family members when we don't think and feel exactly the way they do. So one of the first things that I've noticed, which really Bethany described beautifully, is the fact that having CMT is a process. It's not an event. It's not an event like you go to a wedding and that's the event. It's more of a process like the marriage and the relationship, where there is, you know, the meeting and the beginning, and do I like you, do I know you, don't I like you, and then, you know, getting married, and then the whole lifetime of dealing with things that come up. And having CMT is truly a process because the feelings you have at first are different than the feelings that you have later. And as you go through life, those feelings cycle around, and the way that you experience it and the meaning it has for you changes. In part, it depends on your age. So the things that a 7-year-old cares about, like can they play at recess in the same way that the other kids play, is different than the things that might be high on your list at 17, like, will I be able to dance at the dance? Or can I wear the cute little shoes that all the other girls are wearing? And again, when you are in your 20s and 30s, there are other priorities like finding someone that you want to spend your life with, and how are they going to respond? Are you going to have children? How are you going to deal with that? So that part of the process is the things that are important at one age are very different than at another age. And as things happen physically and in our lives that have nothing to do with CMT, then the feelings cycle around. So that there's the feeling before you're diagnosed of wondering what's going on. There seems to be something not right. There's having a diagnosis, which can really be terrifying, but it can also bring a sense of relief. The feelings of frustration, of sadness, of anger. So that I think it helps to think about this as a process. I think the other thing that's really important is to think of having CMT both as an individual experience, that you with CMT have your own sets of thoughts and feelings and struggles and challenges, but it's also a family experience, that none of us live in a vacuum, so that the things that affect us, we have feelings about, but the people that we love and that love us and care about us also have their own set of feelings about it. And in addition to that, because CMT is an inherited disease, that there are an additional layer of feelings to deal with. Oftentimes, guilt is a very big feeling in terms of feelings that you've passed it on, in terms of siblings, there's a whole host of feelings of, if you're a sibling that doesn't have CMT, you can feel guilty, kind of like survivor's guilt. If you have CMT, then you can feel guilty that somehow you're taking the family resources, whether it be time, attention, financial resources, struggling with siblings who don't have it and might be angry with you for getting all the attention You know, you like him better than you like me. You spend all your time with him. So that I think that it's important to think about it both in the context of a process, but also the context of a family experience. One of the difficulties sometimes I think families run into with it being a family experience is that we each have our own unique ways of dealing with things, whether it's CMT or anything else. And at times it's hard when one person has a particular style of dealing with issues, like let's just go for it, let's do this, let's do that, and you know, we have to do all the research, we have to do all of this, and another family member is very content to sit back and to do what the doctors say, or relax and not push themselves. So I think that there are many, many factors that go into how one experiences living with CMT. And I want to talk about 3 main points to think about in trying to understand why your spouse or your child really wants to do things a whole lot differently than you think they should do it. You know, it reminds me of My Fair Lady when Henry Higgins says, I just don't understand why women can't be more like a man. It would be so much better, you know? But the fact is, we all have our own personalities. And so the first factor is personality, that our personality really in some ways colors how we see things and dictates the second aspect, which is how we cope, that we all cope differently. And then the third thing is that the meaning that the disease has for us. So in terms of personality, I'm going to talk about a number of different spectrums. So the first spectrum is sort of optimism-pessimism spectrum. There are those people who seem to be able to see the silver lining in everything, sometimes to the point where it's really, really annoying. Like, you know, seriously, can't you just be upset about this? But no, well, you see, but although this happened and that happened, in the end, this really worked out fine. And then there's other people that are like the epitome of Eeyore. They walk around with just this dark cloud over them. And for the life of them, they can never just see the positive. So most people are somewhere in the middle of this spectrum, or sometimes they're more on one end than the other. But this very much colors how you take things in and how you feel about something. And that sometimes if you have 2 people at the different ends of the spectrum, they can balance each other out very nicely. Or sometimes it's just really very annoying. And so when you think about a family member who's responding very differently than you would like or than you would, part of it may have to do with they just live in a different end of the spectrum. Another spectrum to think about has to do with the idea of control and the comfort and discomfort that we have not having control over things. That some people seem to be quite comfortable living with uncertainty, that they don't need things planned out. They don't need to be able to predict everything. They don't feel like they have to control everything that happens. And then there are others, again, at the opposite end of the spectrum, that are very, very anxious if they can't predict, if they don't know what's coming. And so depending on where you are on this spectrum, you have a very different response to CMT. Although many, many things in life we absolutely have no control over, most of us live with the fantasy that we do, and it really helps us get through the day. It's only when something smashes up against the fantasy and shatters it that we realize, we really don't have all that much control. So the extent to which you can kind of be comfortable with that really affects how you approach things. Another spectrum has to do with an awareness of what's going on outside in the world around you, and an awareness of what's going on inside of you. So that there are those people who are hyper-vigilant, who always know what's going on around them, who are very aware of every minor sensation going on in their body. And there are other people that seem just pretty oblivious to it. What accident? I didn't see anything. Or, oh, am I bleeding? Gee. It's not that any of these are good or bad. They're just different. And that most comfortable living, I think, takes place more in the middle range. But again, it's not that you should be one way or shouldn't be another way. It's that it helps to be aware of this in trying to understand those people in your life and yourself. So another spectrum has to do with emotions. There are those people who really are very comfortable with emotion, who cry at movies, who when they're happy and something good happens, they jump up and down and they're ecstatic. That when they're terrified, they're just terrified and they let you know. And then there are other people who seem to be very stoic and completely unaware of feelings. Rich's son says that there are 4 basic feelings in life. There is hunger, there is tired, there is thirsty, and there's happy. Those are the 4 feelings. So again, depending on your relationship with feelings, life can look very different. The last spectrum that I'm going to talk about is the tolerance of needing the aid of others. Some people are very, very happy and comfortable with needing help. They have something they can't figure out, they'll call a friend. I'm really stuck on this. Can you help me think this through? Or, if somebody's feeling really depressed, all right, I'll try antidepressants for a short term, or I'll go to therapy. I need braces? Okay, fine, I'll use braces. There are other people who really are very, very anxious and uncomfortable with the idea of needing help. No, I can do it myself. So they will never ask for help with others. They don't have any feelings of neediness whatsoever. And they have this idea that to really be a grown-up means that you really don't need anybody for anything. I like to tell people that actually what is really, really grown up is adult, mature dependency, such that it's okay to need people for things, that as humans, we actually all need people for different things, and that it's a healthy sign to be able to do things on our own, but also a healthy sign to be able to rely on others. Like, I don't know, asking for directions at the gas station, things like that. So if you think about yourself, and if you think about the people in your life, and if you think about these spectrums, it helps to get a sense of where someone is coming from. So, and it also affects how people cope, that people don't need anybody, they're going to cope differently. You know, if you don't need anybody, and if it's really important to be stoic and you're not comfortable with feelings, you're going to cope in very different ways than somebody else. The second thing I want to talk about is the idea of people experience illness in very different ways. And I'm not necessarily thinking all consciously, but also sort of subconsciously. So that there are some people who experience being sick, being ill, or having CMT, in this case, as a challenge. Something that is a challenge in their life, and they need to tackle it. And so they'll respond differently to it than somebody who experiences it differently. Oftentimes people who see it as a challenge, I don't know, they start support groups. They're really active, and they take charge in different ways. There are those people who can experience having CMT as an enemy, that CMT is their enemy. Now, by the way, these different ways of experiencing CMT, it's not like you can only choose one, that most people experience it in different ways at different times. But these are just some of the experiences that people can have. And so oftentimes, if the experience of CMT is an enemy, then there's a lot of a fight against having CMT, a fight against the things that need to be done for it. It can cause a lot of fear or a lot of anxiety. One of the things that Bethany really illustrated is the ways in which she came to integrate having CMT as a part of herself. And I could not describe it in any way better than her, that really coming to the place where CMT is a part of her, but doesn't define her. And that having it be an enemy and denying it isn't helpful, because it deprives you of being able to work with it in a way that would be most helpful. But also, having it define you is not helpful, because that also closes options. That the idea of being able to integrate it as a part of you really opens up options about how you can live. Oftentimes people experience living with a physical illness as a weakness. And they have a lot of feelings of shame, that they don't want people to know, that it leaves them feeling weak, not weak physically, but weak emotionally, that there's something wrong with them. Again, which is, if you're trying to understand why somebody might not want to use the brace, that's really going to be helpful to them, and it's not because it doesn't physically feel okay, but because there's a sense of embarrassment. And so it really helps. If you can know that, you can be more understanding and work with it. Very close to that, at times it can be experienced as being damaged. There are times that people experience it as a punishment, and they have these ideas that they'll say don't quite make sense to them, but why did this happen? What have I done to deserve this in some ways? And so I think if we can be aware that there are different ways that we experience it, it can be really useful. And I believe I'm talking to 3:45. Is that correct, Elizabeth? Yeah. Okay, so I should probably, I should probably leave a couple minutes for a question, right?
Or they can come at the end, so
So
we're
how
probably
would you?
kind of towards, yeah.
Okay. I clearly had more to say than I thought. What a surprise.
Yeah. So thank you very much.
I'm
and-
quiet
Thank you
all
very
day in
much.
my office.